Seniors and Health warmly welcomes you. At 68, I've chosen a quieter life. I no longer chase conversations or force connections. I've stepped back, not out of bitterness, but out of peace. In this story, I'll share why avoiding people saved my spirit. I didn't suddenly wake up one morning and decide to avoid people. It happened slowly, gently, after years of being available to everyone but myself. I used to fill my days with calls, visits, and small talk. I smiled through conversations I didn't enjoy and agreed to things I didn't need. I thought being surrounded meant being valued. But something changed after I turned 65. I began to feel drained, not physically, but emotionally. I noticed that some people only called when they needed something. Others spoke but never really listened. And crowds, even friendly ones, started to feel like noise. I wasn't lonely, but I was tired. At 68, I chose to pause. I stopped chasing invitations and started choosing quiet. I let go of obligations that felt heavy. I gave myself permission to decline, to be still, to enjoy my own company. Some might call it isolation. I call it clarity. In the peace of fewer conversations, I started hearing my own voice again. I rediscovered the strength that comes not from being surrounded, but from being settled within. And for the first time in decades, I began to breathe deeper. And how solitude has quietly healed what noise never could. At first, stepping back from people felt uncomfortable. I wondered if they would notice, or worse, misunderstand. Some friends stopped calling. A few asked if I was upset. I wasn't. I just needed space. The silence felt unfamiliar. I had grown used to the constant background noise of others' lives, stories, problems, small talk. Without it, my days felt strangely quiet. I questioned myself. Was I becoming cold? Selfish? But then something surprising happened. In that stillness, I found room to think clearly. I began to notice the little things, the sound of birds in the morning, the warmth of tea in my hands, how good it felt to take a walk without explaining where I was going. Slowly, I felt lighter. Not lonely, just less burdened. I wasn't shutting people out. I was letting myself in. And for the first time in a long while, I realized, quiet can be kind. When I was younger, I surrounded myself with people. Friends, co-workers, neighbors, family. I believed that the more connected I was, the stronger I'd feel. And for a long time, it was true. We shared birthdays, laughter, road trips, Sunday dinners. But life, as it often does, brought change. I lost my wife at 61. We had been married for over 30 years. Her passing wasn't sudden, but it still felt like the ground shifted beneath me. In the weeks that followed, people showed up, kind, supportive, offering meals and words. But after the first month, the calls slowed. The visits stopped. And the silence that followed was different. It wasn't peaceful, it was painful. I tried to stay busy. I joined groups. I said yes to every invitation. But deep inside, I felt disconnected. I could be in a room full of people and still feel completely alone. The conversations felt shallow, the noise overwhelming. I was grieving, but also pretending. Pretending I was okay. Pretending I still enjoyed things that no longer brought me joy. One afternoon, I attended a birthday party for a neighbor I barely knew. I smiled, ate cake, made small talk. And halfway through, I felt exhausted, not physically, but emotionally drained. That night, I sat on my porch in silence. For the first time, I didn't feel lonely in the quiet. I felt safe. Safe from having to perform. Safe from having to explain. That was the turning point. I realized that my heart wasn't healed, not because I was alone, but because I hadn't allowed it the space to rest. I had tried to patch grief with distraction. I needed time, space, stillness. I needed to hear my own thoughts without other voices crowding in. So I began saying no. No to large gatherings. No to conversations that felt forced. No to people who only reached out when they needed something. Instead, I said yes to walks at sunrise, to writing in my journal, to reading old letters from my wife. I sat with my sadness, and strangely, it softened. It didn't disappear, but it became something I could hold without fear. Grief taught me that healing isn't loud. It's not always found in talking or doing. Sometimes, it's found in sitting quietly with the ache until it fades into understanding. I still see people, but differently now. I visit those who truly care, not those who only ask out of habit. I speak when I have something to say, not to fill silence. And when I'm alone, I don't feel lacking, I feel restored. Many fear solitude because they've never tried it long enough to find its gifts. But for me, after loss, solitude became a friend. It didn't fix everything. But it gave my heart room to breathe, to grieve, and finally, to grow. Letting go of constant social noise didn't make my world smaller. It made my world deeper. And that's how I began to find peace, not in people, but in presence. My own. For much of my life, I was what people call easygoing. I rarely said no. I agreed to help, to attend, to listen, even when I was tired, overwhelmed, or simply uninterested. I feared disappointing others. I didn't want to seem rude or distant. And so, I spent decades smiling through discomfort and nodding when I wanted to rest. This habit runs deep, especially for people of my generation. We were taught to be polite, to keep peace, to avoid conflict at all costs. But over time, I realized something quietly painful: in always pleasing others, I had stopped pleasing myself. I began to notice how often I would agree to things just to avoid guilt. I'd say yes to phone calls that drained me, go to events I didn't enjoy, or keep friendships that had long outlived their warmth. And each time, a small part of me would shrink. Not because the people were bad, but because the effort to maintain everything was exhausting. Turning 68 was a quiet awakening. I began asking myself, why am I still doing this? Why am I still trying to be available to everyone? Who taught me that being liked was more important than being well? That year, I gave myself a new rule: if saying yes felt heavy, I would say no. It wasn't easy at first. Old habits don't leave quietly. I remember canceling a lunch I didn't want to attend, and feeling a rush of guilt followed by a strange sense of freedom. I had honored my time. My energy. My inner voice. It was uncomfortable, but it was also empowering. Some people didn't understand. A few drifted away. But the people who truly valued me, the ones who cared about my well-being, not just my availability, remained. Our connections deepened because they were now built on honesty, not obligation. And something beautiful happened in that space I reclaimed. I started reconnecting with myself. I picked up hobbies I had shelved years ago. I spent mornings walking instead of rushing. I took naps when I was tired, not when I had time. I learned how to be alone without feeling selfish. The world didn't fall apart when I stopped pleasing everyone. In fact, my world finally began to feel like mine. This shift also improved my health. My blood pressure became more stable. I slept better. I even felt lighter in my chest, as though the invisible weight of everyone else's expectations had been quietly lifted. Here's what I've come to understand. Saying no isn't rejection. It's redirection. It's choosing peace over pressure. Clarity over clutter. Truth over performance. If you've spent your life trying to be everything for everyone, I invite you to pause and ask, what would happen if I gave that energy back to myself? Not to become selfish, but to become whole. At 68, I no longer feel the need to impress, explain, or overextend. I simply live, gently, honestly, and with intention. And in doing so, I've discovered a version of myself I hadn't seen in years, one who is calm, centered, and finally free. As I grew older, I began to realize that some of the people around me, friends, neighbors, even relatives, often brought more stress than support. At first, I thought it was normal. Complaining, gossiping, arguing about politics, or comparing whose health was worse, it seemed to be how many people passed the time. I used to sit through it, nod politely, even offer sympathy. But deep down, it started to wear me down. By the time I turned 68, I noticed something that startled me. After certain conversations, I felt physically tense. My shoulders ached, my head hurt, and I slept poorly. I replayed arguments in my mind. I worried about things that weren't even mine to fix. My energy was drained, not by age, but by negativity I didn't realize I was absorbing. That's when I made a quiet promise to myself: protect your peace at all costs. This didn't mean cutting everyone off. It meant becoming more aware. I started paying attention to how I felt after each interaction. Some people made me feel calm and seen, even if we didn't talk often. Others left me anxious, agitated, or tired. So I adjusted. I didn't make a scene or write dramatic messages. I simply stepped back. One of the biggest changes was limiting my exposure to chronic complainers. I had a longtime friend who called weekly, but every conversation was full of complaints, about her children, the news, her health, her neighbors. I tried helping, offering advice, changing the subject. But it always returned to the same script. And one day, I asked myself, what is this really doing to me? The answer was clear: it was exhausting me emotionally. So, I gently let that relationship fade. I wished her well in my heart, but I stopped picking up the phone every time it rang. Instead, I spent that time listening to music, reading, or walking in silence. And what happened? I felt lighter. My thoughts became clearer. I laughed more, sometimes just at the wind moving the curtains. Avoiding negativity has become an act of self-care. I no longer feel guilty about limiting conversations that drain me. I don't argue about things I can't change. I don't watch endless news. I don't try to fix people who don't want to change. I have learned that mental peace is worth protecting like a precious heirloom. This shift has improved more than just my mood, it has helped my body. My blood pressure is steadier. My sleep is deeper. I no longer carry other people's burdens on my shoulders. Here's what I've learned, and what I hope others will consider. You don't have to attend every conversation you're invited to. You don't owe your energy to people who don't respect it. And you can love people from a distance, without sacrificing your inner calm. At 68, peace is not a luxury. It's a requirement. I've seen too many people grow bitter as they age, not because of life, but because they never learned how to let go of noise and negativity. Today, I choose quiet. I choose kindness. I choose presence. And most importantly, I choose peace. When I was younger, my days were often packed with responsibilities, family, work, community obligations, helping friends. I was always on, always available, always saying, sure, I can do that. And in the middle of all that doing, I slowly stopped asking myself what I actually wanted. At 68, with the rush of earlier decades behind me, I finally had space. And instead of filling it with more people or busyness, I made a decision. I would use this chapter of my life to rediscover what brings me peace, purpose, and quiet joy. It began with little things. I started spending my mornings in silence, without turning on the TV. I'd sip my tea by the window and just watch the trees. Some mornings, I'd journal, writing down thoughts, memories, or simply what I was grateful for. It didn't seem important at first, but I began to notice that these moments calmed me in a way that no social event ever could. I also picked up old interests I had long forgotten. I began gardening again, not for the vegetables, but for the rhythm of it. The feeling of soil on my hands, the sunlight warming my back, the quiet focus it brought. It became more than a hobby, it became therapy. I wasn't doing it to impress anyone. I was doing it for me. Then came books. In my younger years, I used to read for fun, but that habit faded as life got busy. Now, with quiet evenings and fewer distractions, I return to it. Reading historical novels, spiritual reflections, even cookbooks, it all reawakened a sense of curiosity that I didn't realize I had lost. And something beautiful happened as I gave time back to myself. I stopped needing others to fill my emotional space. I didn't wait for someone to invite me out or call me to feel valued. I no longer measured the quality of my day by how many people I interacted with. I found satisfaction in small rituals, lighting a candle before dinner, walking around the block at sunset, listening to music from my youth. That's not to say I isolated myself completely. I still speak with a few dear friends, I still visit family, and I enjoy small, meaningful conversations with my neighbors. But now, I don't use those interactions to escape silence. I welcome the silence, and it welcomes me back. The truth is, many of us fear being alone because we've never really practiced it. We fill every gap with noise, people, or distraction. But once I gave myself permission to simply be, without the need to entertain or be entertained, I discovered a gentler rhythm of living. And my health noticed, too. Less stress. Better sleep. A steadier heart. A calmer mind. So if you're in your 60s or beyond, and find yourself with time that used to be filled with others, don't rush to fill it again. Let it breathe. Use it. Nurture it. Because time for yourself isn't selfish, it's sacred. It's where your truest self lives. And after decades of giving your life to others, you deserve to meet that self again, with patience, love, and wonder. There was a time when I believed a good day meant being surrounded by people. The more visitors, the more phone calls, the more plans on the calendar, the more important I felt. Like many others, I equated connection with activity. I thought being alone was something to fear or fix. But now, at 68, I've learned something gentler, deeper, and much more truthful. You can feel full without a crowd. You can live a rich, meaningful life without needing to constantly be in the company of others. At first, this realization came as a surprise. I thought that if I stopped attending every event, replying to every message, or keeping up with every social obligation, I would feel empty. But the opposite happened. The fewer expectations I placed on myself socially, the more space I found to simply be. And in that space, I discovered quiet contentment. Solitude isn't the absence of connection, it's the presence of self. Each day, I started to notice little things that had always been around me but were lost in the noise of a busy life. The sound of the wind brushing through the trees. The scent of coffee in a quiet morning kitchen. The joy of finishing a book without interruption. The feeling of warmth from sunlight across my back porch. I stopped looking outward for stimulation and started looking inward for peace. And no, I didn't become a hermit. I still wave to neighbors. I still exchange smiles at the store. But I no longer need those moments to validate my day. They are simply pleasant extras, not essential fuel. The truth is, many of us were never taught how to be alone with ourselves. We were raised in a world that says, go out, be seen, be active, be needed. But aging has gifted me a new way of being, one where I don't need to be constantly engaged to feel alive. I can sit in silence and feel gratitude. I can enjoy a meal with no conversation and still feel connected to something greater. This shift changed my relationship with myself. I became less critical, more gentle. I no longer judged my worth by how many friends I had or how often I was invited places. I started asking, what do I really need today? Often, the answer was simple: rest, a walk, a quiet moment of reflection. And most beautifully, I found that this internal fullness gave me more patience and warmth when I did connect with others. I wasn't showing up to be filled, I was showing up already whole. Conversations became less about being heard, and more about truly listening. Relationships became less about quantity, and more about depth. If you're afraid of being alone, I understand. It's a fear that runs deep. But I invite you to reconsider what solitude really is. It's not a punishment. It's a return. A soft landing place. A chance to breathe without performing. At 68, I no longer chase the crowd. I've found enough in my own company. And in that quiet, I discovered a truth I wish I had known sooner. A peaceful life may not be loud or full of applause, but it is deeply, beautifully complete. People often misunderstand when I say I avoid others now. They assume I'm bitter, withdrawn, or depressed. But the truth is quite the opposite. I'm not lonely, I've simply become more selective. At 68, I no longer feel the need to keep every connection alive. I don't chase after people who only check in once a year or those who bring more drama than joy. I don't force conversations that feel empty, or attend gatherings just to be polite. I used to do all of that. I thought it was the right thing to do. But over time, I realized something essential: presence means more than proximity. I've chosen to surround myself with meaning, not numbers. A heartfelt talk with a friend who truly sees me is worth more than a dozen surface-level chats. A quiet walk alone with my thoughts can feel more comforting than sitting in a crowded room. This doesn't mean I've shut everyone out. Far from it. I still love people, deeply. I just love my peace more. Now, my life is calmer. My relationships are stronger. And most importantly, my time is my own. I haven't given up on people. I've just given up on noise without connection. And in that decision, I've never felt more free. At 68, I've come to understand something I wish I had known decades ago: peace is not something you find in the world, it's something you create within yourself. I don't avoid people out of fear or anger. I avoid the noise, the pressure, the endless expectations that once made me feel small. Now, I live slower. I choose carefully. I protect my space like a garden, open only to those who bring light, not weeds. Solitude has not made me bitter, it has made me better. Better at listening to myself. Better at finding joy in the small moments. Better at letting go of what no longer serves me. I may not be everywhere, but wherever I am truly present. I may not talk often, but when I do, I speak with clarity. And I no longer feel the need to explain myself. Because this quiet life, I built it with care. And it has given me back everything I once lost in the crowd. Your quiet life is not a failure, it's a victory. Protect it. Honor it. Let it be the gift that carries you home.